99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. Good evening, CJ.
Alma, and good evening to everyone. That's your part of sports.
Drought is on the verge of becoming the next pandemic and there is no vaccine to cure it. Those are the words from the United Nations.
Yes, Greg, no? So medyo nagkakaroon tayo ng
that said logistical issues are affecting Filipino people.
2 weeks kasi na nagkaroon tayo, we were left with
circulating coronavirus variant.
So na-run naman natin.
New coronavirus infections hit a pandemic high in Moscow, tripling in just weeks and forcing Russia's capital to close its Euro-fan zone and extend other restrictions.
And the UN says despite the coronavirus pandemic, the number of people fleeing war and persecution continued rising last year, with global population over 52 million, double the figure at that year.
3 million people more. We were at 79.
First, here in the country, Health Secretary Maria Rosario Vergeres said logistical issues are affecting the country's genome sequencing output. And it's also delaying the release of updates on the circulating coronavirus variants. Genome sequencing, which analyzes a sample taken from a diagnosed patient and compares it with others, is used to check for the presence of COVID variants. Take a look.
Yes, Greg, no? So medyo nagkakaroon tayo ng problems logistically. It's not really a big problem kasi parating na rin naman, ano? But with these 2 weeks kasi na nagkaroon tayo, we were left with these kits na para dun sa maliliit na makina. So na-run naman natin siya with 45 samples. Prioritize natin yung mga lugar na mga tumataas ang mga kaso sa ngayon, no? So maybe tomorrow or the following day makakapaglabas tayo ng mga resulta nitong 45 na samples na ito. Na-i-commit naman sa atin ng Philippine Genome Center and the UPNIH na baka by this coming week, no, baka dumating na itong ating mga supplies until the end of the year na yan. So we are not seeing any of the parang magkakaroon pa tayo ng issue towards the end of the year. Pero ito lang po ngayon ay medyo nagkaroon ng pag-slow down ng ating pagtetest ng genome sequencing because of this specific logistical issue.
The health official said authorities will get samples from areas seeing increases in cases, such as those in Visayas and Mindanao. Aside from variants, Alpha, Beta, Delta, and Theta, the Gamma variant, or P1, had been also detected in the country. A variant of concern is defined as one with increase in transmissibility, increase in virulence, or change in clinical disease presentation, and decrease in effectiveness of public health measures or available diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics.
Now in other news, Russia's capital, Moscow, on Friday registered 9,056 new coronavirus infections in 24 hours, a record since the start of the pandemic, according to government statistics. Countrywide, 17,262 new cases were recorded, the highest number since February 1st, with 453 deaths, according to government statistics published on the Stop Coronavirus RF website. There were 78 new deaths in Moscow. Faced with the spike, Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin, who has been rolling out restrictions for nearly a week, said that the city would limit gatherings and close the Euro 2020 fan zone outside of the Luzhniki Stadium. The increase in cases in Russia comes as the country struggles to encourage Russians to get vaccinated, even though the country launched a mass campaign of free jabs in December and has developed and approved 4 vaccines: Sputnik V, Epivac Corona, Covivac, and the one-dose Sputnik Light.
Meanwhile, Spain will be lifting the legal requirement to wear a mask outdoors very soon. Here's Beverly Madrid for the report. Bev.
Hello, Alma. Good evening.
Good evening, Bev.
Yes. Mhm. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez today announced that Spain will be lifting the legal requirement to wear a mask outdoors from June 26. The lifting is to be approved at a special cabinet meeting on Thursday, Sanchez said on a visit here in Barcelona. He also said that in the coming days, our streets and our faces will regain their normal appearance and that we will start to enjoy life in the street without wearing a mask. Spain currently has very strict mask rules in place, including the required use outdoors by everyone aged 6 and over, even when social distancing can be observed. But many health experts have been calling for an end to mask wearing outdoors for some time now. Masks first became obligatory on public transport in early May 2020 in a bid to reduce COVID-19 infections, and within weeks were made compulsory in the street for anyone aged 6 and above. Anyone violating the rules has faced a fine. Earlier this year, Spain briefly introduced a law making masks obligatory at all times on the beach, but after a backlash, it was amended, meaning they were necessary while sunbathing or swimming if social distancing was respected. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Bev, for your updates there. And that's exciting news for you guys. And stay safe.
Thank you, Alma. Stay safe. Reporting from Barcelona, Spain, I'm Beverly Madrid. We live in interesting times.
Now from Spain, we go to Thailand, where the country is planning to reopen its borders to tourists in mid-October for those who are fully vaccinated. That according to an announcement from the Prime Minister. We have Gretchen Kasadsad for the details. Gretchen.
Good evening, CJ. Yes, Thailand will fully reopen to foreign visitors in 4 months. Premier Prayut Chan-o-cha vows in a televised address, citing the urgent need to save the kingdom's ailing tourism industry. Here's Premier Prayut Chan-o-cha. Let's listen in.
ตั้งเป้าเอาไว้ว่าประเทศไทยจะต้องเปิดประเทศทั้งประเทศให้ได้ภายใน120 วันนับจากวันนี้ส่วนเมืองท่องเที่ยวที่สำคัญหากพร้อมได้เร็วกว่าก็ควรจะทยอยเปิดให้ได้เร็วกว่านั้นยกเว้นหากมีสถานการณ์ร้ายแรงใหม่เกิดขึ้นหรือมีความจำเป็นจริงๆก็ใช้พิจารณาเป็นกรณีไป
To do this, Thailand's top priority is to get at least one shot for everyone in the country ahead of the reopening. The Premier Prayut Chan-o-cha expects 50 million Thais to be inoculated by October with the target of at least 10 million per month. The coronavirus pandemic has hammered Thailand's tentpole tourism sector amid border closure and strict hotel quarantine measures. The impact has reverberated across different sectors, downing hotels, restaurants, bars, and local transport operators. In the country's present battle against the third wave has left local businesses clamoring for more government aid. Tourism previously made up almost 20% of Thailand's national income. A so-called Phuket sandbox has also been floated, allowing vaccinated tourists to enter the country without quarantine. But the mixed messaging from authorities on the program has left some potential visitors gun shy for purchasing flights. Prayut's address signifies a dramatic turnaround in Thailand's vaccine and reopening strategy. The government originally planned to reopen the kingdom at the outset of 2022 after reaching herd immunity by giving 2 jobs to 70% of all residents. The new plan brings forward the reopening date by a month and a half and makes do with nearly half the jobs required in the previous plan. The long ailing economy prompted rethink. Since March, Thailand has been suffering through a third wave of infections and subsequent business lockdowns. In May, the Bank of Thailand made economic projection for three scenarios. If herd immunity is achieved by the first quarter of 2022, it forecasts growth of 2% in 2021 and 4% in 2022. A herd immunity delayed to the third quarter would slow the rates to 1.5% and 2.8%, while further lag till the fourth quarter would bring growth down to 1% and 1.1%. The forecast show how vulnerable Thailand is without tourism and the businesses that flourish because of it. That is the latest report here in Bangkok, Thailand. CJ, back to you.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. And news of reopening borders for tourists should be enough to encourage everyone to get inoculated there in Thailand.
Yes, CJ. This is Gretchen Kusaza, CJ, reporting from Bangkok, Thailand. We live in interesting times.
Now from Thailand, we go to the United Kingdom, where COVID vaccinations are now to become mandatory for care home staff under plans to be announced by ministers as they consider extending the move to all NHS staff. Joining us live is Aribel Celestino.
Hi, Alma, and yes, all care home staff in England will need to be fully vaccinated against coronavirus under a controversial new law the government announced on Wednesday. If approved by Parliament, the new legislation means that from October, anyone working in a care home must have 2 doses of a vaccine unless they have a medical exemption. The rules will apply to all workers employed directly by the care home, agency workers, and volunteers deployed in the care home. And while Alma, Health Minister Matt Hancock said that vaccines save lives, and while the staff and residents in care homes have been prioritized and the majority are now vaccinated, we need to do everything we can to keep reducing the risk. He also added that they will be consulting further on whether to extend to other health and social care workers because they have a responsibility to do all we can to safeguard those receiving care, including those in the NHS, our state-funded health service. According to the health minister, it is the right thing to do and a vitally important step to continue protecting care homes now and in the future. NHS figures to June 6 show that 84% of staff in care homes in England have had 1 dose of vaccine, and almost 69% have had both jabs, although there is a wide geographical disparity in uptake. And as you know, Alma, Britain has been one of the countries worst hit by the pandemic, with 127,926 deaths among those testing positive for the coronavirus. On Thursday, Britain recorded 11,007 new daily coronavirus cases, with the emergence of the Delta variant pushing the figure above 10,000 for the first time since late February. Also, Alma, the government on Monday announced it was delaying steps to lift restrictions due to concern over the spread of the new strain, first detected in India. The government said that a 4-week delay would give it time to fully vaccinate millions more. The death rate remains low, with 19 fatalities recorded on Thursday. The vaccines are believed to be highly effective against preventing serious illness from the variant, but there is concern whether rising cases numbers will turn into death tolls similar to previous waves, which combined have seen 120,945 people lose their lives. A government report published on Thursday found that cases are rising exponentially across England, driven by mostly unvaccinated age groups. The data suggested cases were doubling every 11 days. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Aribel. And with the Delta variant, now a variant of concern over there in the United Kingdom, it is important to vaccinate our care home staff who are taking care of our elderly there. Thank you very much for your update, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me today. Reporting from the United Kingdom, I am Aribel Celestino, and we live in interesting times.
Now, in a related news, Londoners were not surprised after British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced a 4-week delay to the full lifting of coronavirus restrictions in England due to a surge in infections caused by the Delta variant. We have JL Bautista with that report. JL.
Londoners gave their opinion after British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced a 4-week delay to the full lifting of coronavirus restrictions in England due to a surge in infections caused by the Delta variant. The delay comes as a blow to Johnson's plans to fully reopen the UK economy on June 21st after months of gradually easing restrictions since March. Let's listen in.
By Monday, the 19th of July, we will aim to have double jabbed around 2/3 of the adult population, including everyone over 50, all the vulnerable, all frontline health and care workers, and everyone over 40 who received their first dose by mid-May.
Newspapers had been counting down to what had been dubbed Freedom Day, which was set to mark an end to all social distancing restrictions and the reopening of nightclubs. But Johnson said a sharp rise in infections had prompted a decision to ease off the accelerator and focus on ramping up vaccinations. On the evidence I can see right now, I'm confident that we will not need more than 4 weeks and won't need to go beyond July 19, Johnson told a press briefing. Health policy is devolved in the 4 nations that make up the UK, handled separately in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Scotland, which was due to move to the lowest level of restrictions on June 28, is also expected to announce a delay to its reopening. In England, most current rules, including limits on the number of people who can meet in pubs and restaurants, will remain in place until July 19, although restrictions on the number of guests allowed at weddings will be lifted. Large-scale pilot events such as Euro 2020 football matches will also go ahead as planned. The more transmissible Delta variant, first identified in India, is now responsible for 96% of UK cases, and positive tests have jumped 50% in the last week. Total reported cases are now at their highest since February, around 8,000 new infections a day. The Delta variant is believed to be around 60% more transmissible than the Alpha variant first identified in Kent, southeast England. That strain forced the country to go into another 3-month lockdown in January. Nevertheless, hospital admissions and deaths remain low, thanks in large part to Britain's rapid vaccination rollout. More than 55% of adults in the UK have had 2 vaccine jobs. From London, United Kingdom, this is JL Bautista. We live in interesting times.
New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern received her first coronavirus vaccination injection today, describing it as a milestone as the country steps up a rollout critics say is progressing too slowly. Ardern said the jab, administered at a Maori community hall in Auckland, was pretty pain-free, and she hoped it would encourage others to be inoculated. She said this demonstrates that it's safe, that it's effective, and that it's really important that everyone is vaccinated when they have their opportunity. Unlike many other world leaders, Ardern held off receiving the vaccination early because she wanted to ensure frontline healthcare workers and other priority groups were treated first. The center-left leader has won widespread praise for virtually eliminating COVID-19 in New Zealand, with just 26 deaths among a population of 5 million. But the vaccination effort has not been as efficient. Less than 20% of the population have received a single injection, and only 6% have completed their course of 2 doses. Ardern said this week that the program would intensify from next month, and that the government's goal was for everyone eligible to be vaccinated by the end of the year.
Thousands of Olympic volunteers and officials began receiving vaccines in Tokyo today 5 weeks before the Games. Take a look.
はい、自分自身ワクチンを接種することができて、非常に安心しておりますし、選手をはじめ大会に関係する皆様にも、より安心していただけるということで、嬉しく思っております。
海外から来る私どもの関係する検査員なども多くの方々がワクチンを受けて来日される予定だったので、私たちが原因となって感染源にならないというような安心感は出てきたので、それは少し安心しております。
With just over a month until the July 23 opening ceremony, organizers are in the home stretch and scrambling to finalize virus rules and get participants vaccinated in time. They also face a controversial and difficult decision over how many domestic fans, if any, will be in the stands for the pandemic-postponed games. Japanese Olympic athletes have already begun receiving vaccines, and the rollout expanded on Friday to Olympic staff, volunteers, and others who will interact with overseas participants. The International Olympic Committee has donated enough Pfizer-BioNTech doses for 40,000 people, including airport staff, local media, and Olympic referees. The jabs are separate from those being used in Japan's national vaccine rollout, which began slowly but has picked up pace lately, with over 6% of the population now fully inoculated. The vaccinations come as organizers work to convince a skeptical public that the biggest international event since the pandemic began will be safe.
In other news, the United Nations said despite the coronavirus pandemic, the number of people fleeing war and persecution continued rising last year, with global displacement climbing to over 82 million, double the figure a decade ago. Take a look.
Because in spite of the pandemic, which has obliged all of us to stay at home, to lock down, to be confined, the global trends of forced displacement in 2020 have been higher than in 2019. 3 million people more. We were at 79.5 million in 2019. We're now at 82.5 million for 2020. Borders have been severely shut down. And crossing borders, especially for refugees, not internally displaced people, but refugees, is a life-saving act. But unfortunately, movement of people has become life-threatening in the COVID context. So we had to manage this complicated contrast and dilemma, because addressing issues of internal displacement sometimes is even more difficult than addressing refugee issues, because they find themselves in the conflict. Think of Yemen, think of Tigray today, think of Afghanistan, and so this is also a worrying trend that we had observed in past years that has increased. The number of internally displaced people in this report is almost 50 million. So to think that the only response that we can give to that phenomenon is building walls, pushing people back at sea, or telling them that if they want to seek asylum in Europe, they have to do it from a third country. They cannot enter Europe. This is not only profoundly wrong, terribly wrong from the moral and legal point of view, but it is also completely ineffective.
Global displacement figures swelled by around 3 million in 2020 after an already record-breaking year in 2019, leaving a full 1% of humanity uprooted and displaced. The report highlighted how drawn-out crises like those in Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, and Yemen were continuing to force people to flee, while eruptions of violence in places like Ethiopia and Mozambique were causing surging displacement. The fact that the numbers rose for the 9th straight year was all the more devastating because COVID-19 restrictions had been expected to limit displacement. The UN agency found that by the end of 2020, a record 82.4 million people were living as refugees or asylum seekers or in so-called internal displacement within their own countries, up from some 40 million in 2011.
Weather news now. A British Airways plane's nose gear has collapsed on the tarmac at Heathrow Airport. Pictures show the Boeing 787's nose tilting forward with its forward fuselage crumpled onto the ground. Images show the aircraft, believed to be a Boeing 787, surrounded by more than a dozen emergency services vehicles, including police, fire brigade vehicles, and ambulances. The UK's Air Accident Investigation Branch, or AAIB, has posted a notice to advise that it is investigating what happened. It said, and I quote, "We have sent a team to London Heathrow to begin an investigation into an accident involving an aircraft that suffered a nose landing gear collapse whilst being loaded with cargo." The sight of the Dreamliner nose down on the apron is doubly painful considering it was the very first Dreamliner ever delivered to the airline. British Airways took delivery of 4 787-8s in 2013, 2 in June and 2 in September. This was the very first of the batch. With restrictions from the UK making long-haul flying rather difficult, British Airways has been using many of these highly efficient aircraft primarily to carry cargo. The incident is not affecting other flights at Heathrow.
In other news, clashes between protesters and police broke out in Cali, Colombia, as daily protests continue with demonstrators demanding a change in government policies, an end to police repression, and greater state support for those affected by the pandemic. Take a look. Now, protests began here nationwide on April 28 against President Ivan Duque's proposals to overhaul healthcare and taxes, but it quickly morphed into a broader uprising against economic hardships and inequality, which were exacerbated by the pandemic. Buses, police stations, and courthouses have been vandalized. Road blockades have choked off commerce, costing some $3.2 billion to an economy already reeling from the health crisis, according to the Finance Ministry. The Business Association, FENALCO, says 300,000 jobs have been lost, 40,000 businesses closed. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by North Luzon Express Terminal.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Protect yourself and loved ones. Use Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant that kills 500 strains of bacteria, fungi, and viruses such as coronavirus and other disease-causing microorganisms. Also potent against viruses in pets. It kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes. Dissolve 1 teaspoon in 1 liter of water. Apply on areas for disinfection or use it for misting. Protect Plus Gold.
Welcome back to the news. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has said the country must prepare for both dialogue and confrontation with the United States, but with a particular emphasis on the latter as Pyongyang probes for any U.S. policy shift under President Joe Biden. It was Kim's first reaction to the Biden administration's recent review of its North Korean strategy that promised a practical, calibrated approach, including diplomatic efforts to persuade Pyongyang into giving up its nuclear and missile program. Kim stressed the need to get prepared for both dialogue and confrontation, especially to get fully prepared for confrontation in order to protect the dignity of its state and reliably guarantee a peaceful environment, state news agency KCNA said on Friday. Kim's comments at Thursday's Central Committee meeting signal a wait-and-see approach where the ball is now in the U.S.'s court to push for either dialogue or confrontation. Hong Min from the Korea Institute for National Unification told AFP. Pyongyang had already accused Biden of pursuing a hostile policy and saying it was a big blunder for the veteran Democrat to say he would deal with the threat posed by North Korea's nuclear program through diplomacy as well as stern deterrence. Biden said he would not meet Kim without a concrete plan for negotiating on Pyongyang's nuclear arsenal during a visit to Washington last month by South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Take a look.
If he made any commitment, then I would meet with him, and if there was a commitment on which we met. And the commitment has to be that there's discussion about his nuclear arsenal. And if it's merely a means by which, how do we de-escalate what they're doing? And so if that was the case, I would not meet unless there was some outline made that my Secretary of State and others would have negotiated as to how we would proceed.
The United States today designated Juneteenth, which marks the end of slavery in the country, as a federal holiday, with President Joe Biden urging Americans to learn from their history. Take a look.
This is a day of profound, in my view, profound weight and profound power. A day in which we remember the moral stain, the terrible toll that slavery took on the country and continues to take. What I've long called America's original sin. At the same time, I also remember the extraordinary capacity to heal. And that Juneteenth represents not only the commemoration of the end of slavery in America more than 150 years ago, but the ongoing work that have to bring true equity and racial justice into American society, which we can do. In short, this day doesn't just celebrate the past. It calls for action today. I wish all Americans a happy Juneteenth.
When we establish a national holiday, it makes an important statement. National holidays are something important. These are days when we as a nation have decided to stop and take stock, and often to acknowledge our history.
Most U.S. states recognize Juneteenth as a holiday or commemorate the day, but the bill made June 19 the 12th federal holiday and the first new one in 38 years. Among those present was campaigner Opal Lee, 94, known as the grandmother of Juneteenth, who sat in the front row. Vice President Kamala Harris held her hand as Biden signed the act and handed her a commemorative pen. Juneteenth, National Independence Day, is held on June 19 to celebrate the day in 1865 when the last enslaved African Americans learned that they were free. Juneteenth last year came against a backdrop of protests fueled by the death of George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man killed by a white police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The officer has since been convicted of murder. Major U.S. companies, including Nike and Twitter, announced in 2020 they were making Juneteenth a paid holiday for employees.
Staying in the U.S., one person was killed and a dozen injured in a drive-by shooting spree Thursday as a gunman roamed the streets in the southwestern U.S. state of Arizona, according to police. Over the course of 1.5 hours, a suspect opened fire in at least 8 sites around communities outside Phoenix, apparently at random, before he was taken into custody at a traffic stop. As well as the fatality, 3 other people were shot while another 9 suffered minor injuries, including from broken glass. None of the injuries were thought to be life-threatening. Peoria police spokesman Brandon Sheffert said they don't know what the motive was and they don't have an idea of what this person was thinking when he went out and did this. The suspect was stopped after firefighters spotted a vehicle matching the description of multiple reports, and he did not resist arrest. One weapon was recovered from the vehicle. The incident follows recent mass shootings in the nearby states of California, where a rail yard employee killed 9 people last month, and Colorado, where 10 died at a grocery store in March. There were more than 43,000 gun-related deaths in the United States last year, including suicides, that according to the Gun Violence Archive.
In other news, UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said in a tweet that China is using security legislation to target dissenting voices in Hong Kong after arrest at the pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily. On Friday, Hong Kong police charged 2 executives from the pro-democracy Apple Daily newspaper using a powerful new security law, a day after the company's newsroom was raided over articles it had published. Police said a 47-year-old and a 59-year-old were charged with collusion with a foreign country or with external elements to endanger national security. Apple Daily said the 2 charged executives were Chief Editor Ryan Lau and CEO Cham Kim Hung. Some 500 officers descended on the paper's newsroom on Thursday, bundling computers and notepads into evidence bags. Authorities said the operation was sparked by articles that allegedly appealed for sanctions against China. It was the first time articles published in Hong Kong have sparked arrests under the new law that cracks down on dissent in the international business and media hub. Over 100 people have been arrested under the new security law, which China imposed on Hong Kong nearly a year ago to stamp out dissent in the wake of huge pro-democracy protests.
Dozens of Hong Kongers queue in the early morning hours of Friday for an edition of the pro-democracy paper Apple Daily, as it was delivered to the newsstands. Many, to show support, bought several copies. On Thursday, more than 500 officers had raided the paper's newsroom in an operation authorities said was sparked by articles that allegedly appealed for sanctions against China. Take a look.
Drought is on the verge of becoming the next pandemic, and there is no vaccine to cure it. Those are the words from the United Nations. An appeal from Mami Mizuturi, the UN Secretary General Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction, came as the UN agency heads warned that drought affects more people than any other slow onset disaster. Take a look.
Within the next 80 years, 129 countries will experience increased exposure to drought due to climate change alone. An additional 23 countries due to population growth, and another 38 due to the interaction of population growth and climate change impact. If you just look at these numbers, yes, there's a really big number of countries that will be exposed to increased drought. So this is a global issue, something like we're seeing as a pandemic. Drought can be the next catastrophe, and there is no vaccine. If we do not act now, our exposure to drought risk threatens to derail our progress towards the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
We are seeing in places such as, and these cases are within the report, such as the Danube Basin, droughts, an increasing number of them affecting irrigation, hydropower generation, and most critically, transportation. And we saw that on the Rhine as well itself. The modernized view of drought is that it is not simply agricultural. That in fact, the dimensions that we're seeing, I mean, especially in so-called developed regions, are certainly the impact on the ability to export crops and services, but also the direct impacts on the functioning and the supply chains on which all societies rely.
Prevention has far lower cost in humanitarian, financial, and environmental ways than reaction and response. Drought resilience partnerships at the national and local levels will be critical to managing drought in a warming world where rainfall will become ever more unpredictable.
At least a dozen people have been killed in Bhutan and Nepal, and several others are missing as torrential monsoon rains hit the region, triggering landslides and inundating homes. Take a look.
खोलाको बाढी चाहिँ बढ्दै गयो र त्यसमा मैले के खबर सुने भने चाहिँ तपाईको माथिदेखि चाहिँ पहिरो थुनिएर यो मेलम्चीमा आउँदैछ भन्ने मैले खबर सुने त्यसपछि हामी सबैजना माथि बस्यौं र त्यसले हेर्दा तपाईको खोला बढ्दै गएपछि अब स्थिति अलि भए नै भयो.
Officials said a landslide caused by the monsoon deluge blocked a river, which then burst and sent a flood of water downstream late Tuesday, inundating a settlement in Sindupalchok district near the capital, Kathmandu. The number of deadly floods and landslides has increased in recent years in Nepal. Experts say climate change and more road construction could be triggering the deadly disasters. More than 200 people were killed in landslides and floods in Nepal during last year's monsoon season.
Meanwhile, tourists are visiting the Death Valley National Park in Eastern California, known as the hottest place on Earth. The temperature has hit 128 degrees Fahrenheit or 53 degrees Celsius, but the National Park spokesperson says it is very early for the middle of June. Take a look.
Standing at a thermometer in front of Furnace Creek Visitor Center. Death Valley is the hottest place on Earth. Our world record is 134 degrees Fahrenheit, but it hasn't been that hot since 1913. Last summer, we hit 130, and yesterday, 125, which is very early for the middle of June. If you look at the average temperature in Death Valley for a summer month, and when I say average, I mean the overnight low and the daytime high, what that average is over a 24-hour period. And look at that, Death Valley has gotten much warmer in the last 20 years than it was before.
Well, we're from Michigan, so this is extremely hot for us, and we have a ton of water in the car, Gatorade, and we aren't going to do much.
In Death Valley.
Is braced for record heat waves this week, with approximately 50 million Americans placed on alert for excessive temperatures, which could approach 120 degrees Fahrenheit in some areas. The heat wave, which stretches like a blob over much of the western third of the U.S. map, extends east to west from Wyoming to California and north to south from Idaho to Arizona. Average temperatures in the vast region are around 20 degrees Fahrenheit above the seasonal norm, with the arid desert states of Arizona and Nevada most likely to shatter records. The Arizona city of Phoenix experienced temperatures of 115 degrees Fahrenheit on Monday, but forecasters predict it could pass 118 degrees by the end of this week, with lows in the upper 80s at night. Las Vegas, meanwhile, in neighboring Nevada, is suffering its most extreme prolonged heat wave since early summer 2013, according to local media, and the city by Wednesday could near its decades-old temperature record of 117 degrees Fahrenheit set in 1940.
In other news, hunters shot and killed a brown bear in northern Japan after it rampaged through a city, injuring 4 people, including a soldier, and lumbering across busy roads. Take a look.
窓から見たらまっすぐ来るから、もう正面向かってくるからさ、窓割られるんじゃないかな。来るとこでないよね。一瞬声も出ないよね。
Earlier, dramatic news footage showed the bear bounding along a residential street, crossing a busy road and flowing at the gates of a military barracks, causing alarmed troops to scatter. 1 soldier was injured in the bear's rampage in the city, which will host the Olympic marathon and race walking events in August. Another victim was mauled by the bear after it attacked him from behind, TV footage showed. The person was taken away on a stretcher. The rampage prompted local school closures and the cancellation of several flights at a small regional airport, according to NHK. Earlier, government spokesman Katsunobu Kato told people in the Hokkaido region to be on alert. One of the victims was in their 40s, one in their 70s, and another in their 80s, according to NHK, which did not give details of the 4th. They were not only the only bear casualties on Friday, with authorities in central Nagano's Suzaka City also reported a resident was attacked. Asian black bears are native to large parts of Japan, including the country's main island, while brown bears roam Hokkaido further north. The Japan Bear and Forest Society has warned that forest-dwelling bears are being spotted in greater numbers in areas inhabited by humans as they search for food.
And here's MJ Racadio for our showbiz update. MJ.
Here are the showbiz updates. Thor actor Chris Hemsworth made a different kind of birthday greetings to Chris Evans, and previously joined Gal Gadot in her docuseries Impact. Let's listen in. Chris Hemsworth trolls Avengers co-star Chris Evans on his birthday with pic of Chris Pratt. On June the 14th, the Thor actor wished Chris Evans a happy birthday, but posted a photo of another Avengers co-star, Chris Pratt. The Thor actor sent Evans a birthday greeting on social media, writing the caption, "Happy 40th birthday, Chris Evans. You'll always be my #1 in my book." I previously joined a virtual conversation with Gal Gadot, presented by American Cinematheque. Let's listen in.
He was a Holocaust survivor who lost his entire family in Auschwitz, when he was 14. And he came to Israel and established his family and started new life there and all of that. But the biggest thing about my grandfather is that after the very traumatic life that he had, he never held a grudge. He didn't have one bone in his body that with hate or anything like this. Actually, the contrary, he was all about love and bringing people together and helping people whenever he could, and enjoying and celebrating life and laughing out loud. And he had a tremendous effect on in my life.
If you keep your mouth shut, the prettier you look. That was a phrase that I was told a lot.
Some people can look and just say, wow, why don't y'all move? You can't. You don't know how to live anywhere else.
National Geographic presents Impact with Gal Gadot is a documentary short series that follows the powerful stories of 6 women who are making an extraordinary impact on their communities around the world. Despite living in areas marred by violence, poverty, trauma, discrimination, oppression, and natural disasters, these brave women remain undeterred as they dare to dream, stand out, speak up, and lead. The women featured in each short film come from very different backgrounds across Brazil, Puerto Rico, Michigan, California, Louisiana, and Tennessee. Yet they are all connected by their unwavering determination and commitment to improving the lives of people around them.
You don't let anybody tell you that you're not worth it.
This is your life. This is your identity.
You're the entire ocean in one drop. You have everything within you to show up.
That's it for our showbiz updates tonight. MJ Ricardo here. We live in interesting times.
And that should be the goal of everyone, try to make a good impact in the world. That's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. The news returns tomorrow at 11 Philippine time. I'm CJ Hero. Join us again.
We'll see you back tomorrow. Before we go, I'd like to greet Dr. Nori Medrano. Thank you very much for all your help. And have a good night. Have a good day tomorrow. And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
This program is supported by Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant, kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes.